Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson and welcome to Tools, Techniques, and Mental Models for Success series. In today's session, we're going to be looking at dealing with change. Change is something that we are grappling with today, and we're grappling with it in a more acute way than we ever have in the past. Uh, really, when we think about dealing with change, change is happening all around us constantly. And in many ways, most people, they're a bit nervous about change. I'm nervous about change. It sometimes gets me on the edge of my seat a little bit. I think that most people are nervous about change, some more than others, some to their detriment. I think change can be a catalyst for improvement, and I think it offers us great opportunities. There can be excitement, but there can also be a lot of fear with it. One of the things that I note about change is that people who've established themselves and have become very good at something, they don't want to let that go. But often, in order to improve, you have to be able to let go of the things that you've learned so that you can strive and move higher. And if you don't choose to do that, as often is the case, then the rest of the world kind of just goes by. And that can be not a good situation for many people. I like this particular quote by Arthur Ashe, taken from his book Days of Grace, a memoir. Arthur Ashe was a famous tennis player back when I was a kid. And he said, most people resist change, even when it promises to be for the better. But change will come. And if you acknowledge this simple but indisputable fact of life, and understand that you must adjust to all change, then you'll have a head start. And I think that's an important thing to build upon, remembering that change is going to happen whether you like it or not. So you might as well embrace it. We'll be talking about other tools in this series that help you reframe some of the resistant elements that come up and sometimes make you not as embracing of opportunities as you should be or could be. So when we think about, are you resistant to change? Right? Or we can think about it in a number of ways, like why someone might be resistant to change. I think about it in the sense that it's taken me many years to get to a certain level or a certain skill level. So when I think about teaching, I think about the many years that it took me to get to be half decent. And then the world starts to change in many ways. There's new technologies, there's different ways that students want to interact. The current pandemic, it would be a perfect example of how that's really accelerated the way people need to learn and gravitate to information. And there's a lot of teachers out there that are kind of resisting. I don't want to be doing this, but they're kind of forced to right now. Honestly, I think this pandemic and the fact that we've had to shut things down and we had to finish off semesters and we have to do new semesters and things of that nature online, it's forced a lot of people to change very, very quickly who otherwise would have resisted it and dragged it about. It still would have happened, change still would take place, but some things occur in our societies that makes us have to accelerate change, and this very often becomes a catalyst. So I think about those things when they're occurring, before they're occurring. I was very fortunate in this case with the pandemic that in the early 1990s, I had an opportunity to learn about distance education when I was actually first learning to teach. I'd been teaching maybe 3 or 4 years, and there was this distant learning opportunity at my college. And I applied for it, and I actually spent 3 summers in Oklahoma learning how to do distance education. The technology there was very advanced for that time, is very primitive for today, but a lot of the things like online teaching and that sort of thing, that was part of what we were learning very much in its infancy at that time. Today, of course, I was very fortunate as well. 4 years ago, my chair had asked me to do an online course, a business management course, and they'd actually asked another faculty member if they wanted to do it, and they didn't want to do it, and they complained to the union, and I often think about that. Much younger faculty member than myself, and I think it you look at different people, how they interpret things and how they think about things. And for me, my first thought was, this is going to be a lot of work. I don't want to do it. I don't see the advantages. But then I caught myself and I said, you have to look at this from a different perspective. And that's something I always stress to people. Try to hold yourself in that moment before you respond too quickly. Give it some thought, think about it, and then look at it from different perspectives and different ways. And usually you'll gain a lot more understanding of some of the advantages as well as disadvantages in certain cases. So I was able to catch myself, and I did say I would do the course, and I learned a whole bunch of techniques about using software, developing videos, etc. And so when the pandemic came, it was a pretty easy adjustment for me. I am by no means an expert at this. I'm in the learning curve, but I wasn't at the very bottom of the ladder. I was maybe about halfway up the ladder. And so, you get so good at something and you don't want to have to come down the ladder to go up the ladder. Very often, though, when change occurs, that's exactly what has to happen. You have to give up on something, come down a few rungs, go from being an expert at something to being a beginner at something before you can rise higher. And if you don't do that, somebody else will. And that leaves many people unemployed. That means leaves them not being the most desirable of employees. If you're entrepreneurial and you don't do those things, other companies will surpass you. If businesses don't do those things, that can leave you in a very vulnerable position. So change is a very important thing to think about, and also to understand what are some of the triggers that puts up blocks for you. Everybody's different in their own way, but understanding what those triggers are can be very, very helpful moving forward. So I always think about that, and I think you should put it into perspective in a story that makes sense to you. I use the ladder story because it makes a lot of sense from me thinking about those things. And when I see that ladder and I'm like, I got to come down a few rungs, being open to that is helpful. And I think about change and how quickly it happens. And I don't know if you can see in this image too clearly, but this was taken around 1908 in downtown Chicago. It was one of those archive photos, and looks like chaos. And when you look at it closely, is there anything that you notice? Take a minute and take a look at that photo. Is there anything that you notice? Took me a while. I saw this posted somewhere, and I can't remember exactly where, but it was very well done. Well, if you're looking very closely, you got to think it's 1908, around that period. Chicago, very busy city, North America, right? And they've got streetcars, there's motorized vehicles. They still have horse and buggies as well. But change is rapidly occurring, and there's this gravitation of people to urban centers, which still goes on today. And you go to any developing country like China, as an example, there's a lot of people moving into big urban centers like Shanghai, Beijing, just to name a few. So you've got all this stuff happen. It's vibrant, and you have technological change happening at a pretty rapid rate, but it changed so fast, they didn't invent streetlights yet. So there's no stop lights or green, orange, red lights. And that didn't really, my understanding when I looked it up was it didn't really happen until around 1912, 1913, the first streetlights. So that happens very often where change is so fast that we don't even have the infrastructure to deal with it, or we don't have the regulatory protections in place to deal with it. So these are things that will occur, but then the other things will also be innovated, and regulatory requirements will catch up at some point. So these are things that occur very, very often. It's not just in the past, it's today. When I see this, I sort of think about in my home city, Toronto, I think about how Uber kind of came into Toronto really, really fast, and Toronto politicians, they had a lot of rules and regulations around taxis, what you can't do, and licensing fees, big fees that taxi companies had to pay. And all of a sudden Uber is there everywhere, and taxi drivers are getting really upset with this, and there's no regulations around it, and politicians don't want to give up on the money that they're getting from taxi licensing, which really wasn't fair to taxi drivers. So it's a big mess, but the public, they're using Uber everywhere and they're loving it. And myself included. I kind of travel a lot and I kind of categorize a city, whether it's an Uber city, and really I should be saying ride sharing program to be fair to everybody else. But for us, it was Uber, and I got used to that. And if I go into a city, if it's an Uber city, I know I can get from place to place really easily. If it's taxi, I gotta wait, I'm not sure, I don't know where my ride is. There's apps you can download, but nothing that is consistent the way it is with just using Uber from city to city. So technology changes very, very quickly, and you're not always going to have all the things around it. In my case, Toronto, the politicians wanted to get rid of Uber, but they quickly saw there was be a huge pushback from the public who was already used to it, and politicians want to get reelected, so they had to work out some compromises with Uber and the taxi industry, just as a couple of examples. So if we think about the historical rate of change, and I'm going to be bringing this around to the construction industry because that's my background. That's where I like to bring our topics in my series. But the historical rate of change, if we go back to the Middle Ages, it would take 100 years or more for the world to feel dramatically different. So very slow. So in somebody's lifetime, you could learn a craft and you could become a master craftsperson in that, and it really wouldn't change that much over your whole career. So life from one century to the next, it wasn't radically different. Things started to ramp up and change faster when we hit the Industrial Revolution. Things started to change much, much more quickly. And that displaced a lot of people. They learned skills like weavers that worked on looms, and they received fairly high amounts of money initially before the actual advances in the loom technology took place. And when the more advanced looms came out, they were able to produce a lot more fabric at a lot lower cost. And so that really displaced a lot of that craft. And it was basically de-skilled. It was taken from a very sort of high level skill to a somewhat lower level skill. And so that definitely had a lot of displacement, but at the same time it made goods and services a lot less expensive, which advanced society as a whole in a lot of ways. There's this saying that has been around for generations. It goes back before Isaac Newton. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And I think at the premise of this statement, it's really, the generation before has taught us something, and the leading innovators and thinkers of the generation previous to us has really advanced us so far. And then we pick up where they left off. We don't have to go all the way back to the bottom of the ladder necessarily. We can pick up where they left off and take it a little bit further. So we stand on the shoulder of giants, and really what that means is technology builds on technology. And so the rate of change has actually been speeding up. And I think about the first student that showed me an iPhone, which wasn't that long ago. And I remember the student showing me, and I was thinking, wow. But I also remember how quickly it seemed that every student had a smartphone. And how quickly, and we'll talk about this in a number of our other episodes in the series, how people have quickly become addicted to the technology as well. It's got a lot of pluses, but there's always some minuses too, and we have to learn to adapt and grow and utilize these technologies to the best of our abilities. So when we think about change, and this, I've already mentioned taxis versus Uber. Like, I think if taxi drivers are going to protest and try to stop ride-sharing programs, they may delay it in some cities. Like Vancouver, it took a long time to get Uber. Kind of was bothersome. I think London, England's had some success in slowing it down. I don't think in Washington, in the US, we used it to go everywhere. It was great. So it just depends, but you might be able to slow it down. But reality, like Vancouver, I mentioned, you can't stop it. It's difficult to stop. And if it's not Uber, it'll be Lyft or another ride sharing program. So taxis versus Uber, you're going to lose if you're trying to stop it. You can maybe delay things. I think about in the construction industry, every contractor had a Purley's map. That was a company that made these map books for every city, like Toronto as an example. You could look up the street names, and it was almost like your construction drawings with a structural grid. You'd look up the street name, it'd say C4, you look at C4, there's where the street is, and then you'd figure out where you were and where you had to go. Of course, we got GPS devices, and that was seen as this wonder in the early 2000s. This GPS device you could buy separately, have it in your car, and it would tell you where to go. It was this amazing device. Well, it didn't take very long before you had the GPS device, or you had it built into your car, but then it was in your phone. And so it's in your phone, and it's quick, and voice recognition's even better, and it has traffic, and the streets are updated by the minute. So you get a new street name today, it's in it right as it's named pretty much. Cell phones pretty much did away with the GPS devices. So very quick progression from one thing to the next to the next. I think about companies that I did a lot of work with as a contractor. Our business, one of our big clients was Kodak. And in Toronto, they had a huge industrial area near a place called Keele and Eglinton, Old Western Road or Western Road in Eglinton. And they had I think around 20 buildings that developed film, a whole pile of different buildings, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people working in this area. And there was no end of work. And I would have never thought that a company like that would end up going bankrupt. They had about 150,000 employees worldwide. They were in business for well over 100 years. They were leaders and innovators in many ways. But in actual fact, they invented the digital camera, the first digital camera, but they didn't really capitalize on it. They didn't really take it where it needed to go. Sometimes the inventor is not the one that, is the one that actually has the most success with something. In many cases it is, but sometimes it's the company that comes after them. And so other companies came with digital cameras, and they surpassed very easily the film industry. Kodak kind of had the mind that we're making too much money on film, and digital cameras are lower quality. But eventually, as we know, the quality exceeded the film sector, and everybody pretty much has access to taking photos. So that changed. And so that was a big client that I thought would never change in lots of ways. Another big client that we had was Kmart. We used to renovate all their stores, and it used to be great, and it used to be cost plus. It was great projects. They just wanted to know that you're going to have a certain amount of people. You'll be able to turn it over in a certain time period. So they were really time oriented, maybe a little bit less cost oriented, and that worked really well for us. But as we know, companies like the department stores, they kind of lost out to companies like Walmart, who was much more successful with improvements in logistics and was much more efficient in their costing. So they really took over the market in a big way and have been hugely successful. But over the last, Amazon's been around, I guess, a little bit over 20 years now, maybe 25. But when they started just focusing on books, but they really had a more global vision, slowly, year by year. And the technology's been improving, and they've been reinvesting in it. If Walmart's not careful, Amazon could very easily do them in. It wouldn't be unthinkable at this point. Nobody knows how that'll work out, and Walmart might be successful still, but definitely this pandemic change again. We have the pandemic. It really has forced people to be online and ordering things, and I think there's a whole generation that was trying to resist it that has gotten very used to ordering things online. So the world changes pretty quickly in a lot of ways, and also the pandemic, if you're a box store or even a retailer, it's going to be difficult for a little while till we pull out of this and things change in that respect as well, and people's thoughts change back to a more normalized environment. So change happens in very quick periods. I read this book, and it's an excellent book by Thomas Friedman. Thomas Friedman has written a lot of good books over his career. That used to be us, meaning the US, and how things have changed that way. Hot, flat, and crowded. Uh, the world is flat. A number of books, but this "Thank You for Being Late" was really looking at how fast things are changing in the different sectors. And he interviewed Eric Teller, who's the CEO of Google's X Research. I think he might actually, his title's probably changed now. I think he might be heading up Alphabet. But at any rate, he sort of mentioned this sort of chart and how fast the rate of change is moving and how we are able to adapt. And so human adaptability, how fast we can learn new things, and that it's been kind of going at a steady sort of pace. And the rate that we need to learn and adapt has been going faster than most people have been able to adapt. And one of the things that he's sort of espoused to, at least in the book that was mentioned, was learning faster and governing smarter. And that governing smarter would be how fast the rate of change is and how governments are able to adapt to change so that they're not taken by surprise. So I think about that as an educator because I see how students' learning habits have changed too. They expect to Google everything very quickly, and they also expect to know and understand these things. So this is part and parcel of that process. Are we able to learn faster and be distracted less? Because that's another big issue, is do we have focus? Are we able to focus and keep our minds on things that we need to learn about? And as I'm speaking here, it's funny because my daughter's actually I'm expecting a grandchild, and I've got phone vibrating beside me. I heard it, my wife's phone ring in the next room, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but I might have my own change going on in life as well. These are the things that we learn to accept and adapt to, but I guarantee you we're going to cover this in another series video where learning faster, how to focus, how to be able to retain information better. We spend a lot of time in education teaching math and memorization, but we don't spend a lot of time teaching how to learning how to learn. And if you're going to adapt to change, that's one of the most important things, is building the ability to learn how to learn, and keep that in mind as we go forward in this series. So what does the historical rate of change potentially mean to you? Change is going to happen more quickly than in the past. You can guarantee that. You can potentially become obsolete much more quickly. That would be a result of that. So you got to choose what sectors you're going into, what jobs you're taking pretty carefully. I always think about when I have an opportunity, is this a one-off, or is this giving me some potential for future growth? So that's always usually in the back of my mind is, what is my opportunity long-term here, or is this just a short-term endeavor? And if it's a short-term endeavor, is this really where I want to go with this? So like I mentioned to you before, when I had the opportunity to teach online 4 or 5 years ago, that business course, I was thinking in my mind, I want to learn how to do this much more proactively. I want to build my skills over some time in this area and devote some effort to learning these skills so I can become adept at it, because there's not going to be less online education in 5 years. There's going to be more online education. So I know it's a growth area. I don't know that it's going to fit everything. There's certain practical things that people need to do in a lab or collaboratively, but I do know it's going to be much, much more prevalent than it is now. So it makes a lot of sense for me with my skill set to invest in that, so I'm staying ahead of the curve and I'm keeping my skill sets up. Otherwise, I have to start thinking about, well, then I'm going to retire, and that's not my desire, to be in a position that way, or to be forced to retire. You want to be in the upper 20% of your field. You can think of Pareto's law, which is the 20-80 rule. Again, we'll do that one in another series, but You don't have to be in the top 2%. If you're in the top 20%, that's probably going to do you fine. And you know what? It's not that hard to get into the top 20%. I know a lot of graduates, I know a lot of people that worked in industry, and they make a lot of improvements in their first year or two on the job, and then they kind of flatline and they don't improve much after that. So if you have a constant sort of focus on continuous improvement over time, you will pass them, and it will not be that difficult to be in the top 20% of your field. Scott Adams has a great take on this. Again, we'll talk about in another series where it talks about goals versus systems, and the systems person wins out over the goals person because they're able to adapt, and they're able to learn, and they don't have to be the best at something. They just have to have 2 or 3 skills that they're like in the top 20-25%, and that combination of skills will make them unique in that particular area. So you want to stay current in your field, attuned to change, be aware of new opportunities. And we're going to talk about this. Know the difference between incremental and disruptive change. So we'll talk about that in a minute, because you have to decide, am I in the wrong sector, or do I know the wrong technology? So do I keep wanting to invest getting better at this? It's like getting better at making buggy whips for carriages back in the early 1900s, if we go back to that earlier slide. Is that really going to help me when the whole industry is going away? Then maybe I should be shifting into, instead of making buggy whips, maybe making upholstered seats for cars or something of that nature, right? So you got to be thinking in those kind of terms. Be committed to lifelong learning, because that's change. And again, if you're effective at learning to learn yourself, then it's not so much a matter of, I can't learn this, or this isn't my thing. It's just, okay, I need to shift. I need to be agile. I need to move laterally over here so I can go up over there. It becomes second nature to you. It becomes a habit. So that will make you be efficient and save you tons and tons of time. And make sure that your business is positioned with the tools that you need, that are necessary for you to master your field and be resilient and adaptable to change. So all of these things will improve you personally. And of course, if you're working in a business, or if it's your business, it's going to help to keep your business to be successful. So change should not happen for change's sake. So you don't want to change just for the sake of changing. You want to change and make the right changes. So you want to make sure that you're picking the right choice, because there's all these options out there. So you have to do some research, and sometimes you don't want to be on the bleeding edge of things. Maybe you want to wait to see what's starting to stick, and then you can invest your time. But you don't want to wait too long that the world has already changed and now you're out of a job, or your business has gone bankrupt. So you have to moderate that. You don't necessarily have to be on the bleeding edge, but you do have to be in the area that you're not being left behind. Some of the changes that are happening, just as a quick update in the construction industry, pandemic and economic repercussions. There's a lot of companies that were probably leveraged, developers and that sort of thing. They're really struggling right now with liquidity. BIM, building information modeling, it's going to revolutionize the way we do things. We're already doing a number of things with BIM, but it's really, in my mind, in its infancy. Some might disagree with me, but I think it's still in its infancy, because I'm seeing all these new things that are coming out. For example, I never would have thought that you would animate a schedule. I knew you'd animate a schedule, meaning you'd develop a schedule for a building to be built. You'd take a 3D model, and then you could connect the activities to the parts being built, and then you could animate the construction process. That I knew. I didn't think that you would have that, and then if there was a delay in your project, you'd have the plan versus the delay occurring, and be able to visually show the impact of the delay on the construction process. It's going to change the way that we develop claims and the way that delays are dealt with, and also the way decisions are made with changes. This is, if we don't make this change, this is the way we're going. If we do make this change, then this is going to hold us back this way. Or if we use this methodology instead, this is going to make us get done faster. So that's just one item in BIM, but you could list out pages of items just when you really dig deep in it. And there's things we don't even know yet. It'll advance prefabrication and manufacturing because things can be made off-site, which can compress schedules. 3D scanning, 3D printing is going to change the way that components are made and methodologies are done. So there are a number of things on my list here that you can sort of see how they will be impacted in many ways. Climate change is going to impact the way that we develop our building systems to be more efficient. We use renewable energy sources. We make more tight envelopes. Building science will become more of a prevalent issue because sometimes when we tighten envelopes, we create other problems. So we got to make sure that we've dealt with those problems so that they don't become bigger issues for the health of our occupants. So there's a number of interactions there. Lean construction industry is notoriously, we'll talk about this in some other series episodes, is notorious for not being that efficient. There's about 32% waste in construction. When I work with professionals in this area, and I work with some very, very smart people, nobody ever argues with me that there's 32% waste in the construction industry. Most will say, I think it's a little bit more. Manufacturing, they have a lot less waste. Construction, we have a lot of opportunity. It's a good thing in a lot of ways. We have a lot of opportunity to improve in these areas. And that's where a lot of the reasons why I wanted to develop this series and the series of YouTube videos so that we can sort of explore and look at different tools, techniques, and metal models that will help to solve some of these issues. So different contract models, and client expectations, as is mentioned here, has changed. Clients expect things faster. They expect lower costs. They expect higher qualities. These are all things that clients demand. And the companies that are better at delivering on those are the companies that will have 80% of their business, going back to Pareto, be repeat business for them. And that's what you want as a business. You want to ensure that you have clients returning. It's very hard to get new clients all the time. So you have to be able to meet client expectations, and you have to be able to adapt and change as their expectations advance. So I always think of those constraints: time, cost, quality, scope, and safety, not as constraints. Typical project management will call them constraint. They're goals for us to beat. So if we have them outlined, they're goals for us to beat. And a lot of change is being pushed towards being able to improve in those particular areas to be able to reach those goals more easily. Two types of change: disruptive, incremental. So as I was mentioning, disruptive is something like BIM. It comes in and it's going to disrupt the way that we do certain things. There's going to be trades that are going to have to change and adapt quite significantly, or they won't survive. So that would be a disruptive one. Incremental is, how do we do something better? How do we keep improving this item? And the process of lean is really looks at a lot of incremental, although it can include disruptive elements as well. But we could be looking at efficiencies. We have bottlenecks. How do we remove bottlenecks? And how can we advance ourselves so that we do our work much more efficiently? You don't have to be perfect. So if you've got 32% waste on your projects, you don't have to be perfect. If you can get it down to 28 or 27% and your competition's at 32%, you're going to do very, very well, especially if you're able to deliver on the things of time and quality to your clients. So those are very positive elements, but you need to know the difference, because if you're stuck on improving something that really is not going to be around very much longer, you're probably better to be looking at how do we move to this new disruptive system and advance on it. I always think of a lot of things like they're tools, and we shouldn't be rooted and wedded to something. I spent many years working with Microsoft Project, and I'm very proficient at Microsoft Project. And if somebody asks me a question, I've got a very high likelihood of being able to answer it. But I keep telling myself, somebody's going to come out with a better scheduling program, and it doesn't matter. I'll just learn that better scheduling program. It's a tool. It's not something I should be wedded to, because that's a problem for me. It should be more, I want to adapt. I shouldn't be afraid of Primavera P6. It's another program. And if there's something that's better than both of them, I shouldn't be afraid of that. So when we think about those changes, we should think about it that way. I'd like you to reflect while listening to this recording how change may impact you. And instead of being a victim of it, think about how you can be a champion of it. What can you do in the next 4 weeks to 1 year, given these volatile and uncertain times, that you'll look back on and be satisfied that you did during this time period? One of the things I'm doing during the pandemic of 2020, because you may be looking at this 2021, 2022, who knows? And one of the things I'm doing right now is this, because I've thought for a long time, this is one way of me scaling and being able to engage with a broader and bigger audience and improve myself in many ways. I've worked with students, and I have many classes that I do at the college, George Brown College, University of Toronto. I teach courses at the Toronto Construction Association, Mechanical Contractors Association. I work with people at local laborers at Local 183. I've written books. I've done these different things from different viewpoints, but I've always wanted to look at how can I scale this to a bigger audience, and I'm hopeful that I can build the skill set up that I can be successful at that. So I've had to come down a lot of rungs. This is one of my earlier videos, so it's going to be a little bit rough around the edges. I know that. I'm good with that. If it fails this video, that's good, because I will have learned what I can do better, and I can adjust, and I can adopt, and I can improve. So those are the things that I think about, and I think it's helpful for you to think about those things. I like to use some examples too. I've done a lot of work with this company, Elliston, who's a fabulous company to work with. And in the Daily Commercial News, they had this article. I put a link down there. But if you Google it, it'll probably be quicker for you. You just have to use the keywords Elliston, formwork, Calgary Hospital, and it'll come up. But they came up with this forming system, and the forming system it works on hydraulics. So one of the problems with forming system, as the notes at the side say, is that you pour concrete, and there's a lot of weight, and while it's setting up, it deflects the form, and so then that's no good, because then you don't have a level form. You got a dipping ceiling and floor. So they came up with this forming system that would adjust with hydraulics, so that as the weight drops it a little bit, it can adjust with hydraulics to level it out. What that meant was you didn't need shoring underneath it, because generally you need shoring underneath the formwork, and you need it to carry the load down several floors, so it transfers effectively to the columns and shear walls that are transferring those loads down to the footings. So with this system, because of the hydraulics, you can keep it open underneath and the floors below. So that means tradespeople can work on the floors below. So they don't have to wait till the columns are gone before they can do their work. That's going to rapidly advance the work that you can do. So it's a different methodology, a different technology that in this particular case, going by the numbers in the charts, really took it down by $187 million, the project, brought it under budget, because you're shortening the schedule, and there's a per diem cost of every day you're on that project. How long that project is, every day there's money being spent. And when you have the type of tradespeople that this project had, 1,500 tradespeople, and billing over $1 million per day, that is substantial. So if you can shorten that time period and shorten the volume of tradespeople on that, that's remarkable. So it's a good example of not always doing things the way you've done them. Just because you've done them a certain way doesn't mean it needs to continue that way. And so you can come up with a different technology. In this case, it would be quite disruptive to the industry, because it would be changing the way that you do it. you wouldn't do it the normal way when you've got wide spans. So it's great opportunities. And there's always these things around. They may not have to be that huge. It might be something that you figure out that you do on your renovation company, and it saves you, $1,000 on a project. But you do that type of project 12 times a year. Well, that's $12,000 just by you changing that methodology, or you innovating how you do something can make a huge difference, or incrementally improving how you do something. So I want to leave you with some food for thought. What technological changes do you see having an impact on the way we construct projects in the future? How might they impact the workforce? Because you should be thinking ahead, how's this going to change? I've got to be thinking right now, how is this pandemic and online teaching going to teach the way that we do things with my business clients, with colleges, universities, with associations? How is this going to change things? And where do I fit in? What skills do I not have? What skills do I need? What actions should I be taking to better improve myself in that way? Doesn't matter though what industry, what sector, always be thinking about those things. And that can be really helpful for you to deal with change. So what technological changes do you see having an impact on the way we construct projects in the future? How might they impact the workforce? And how can you best position yourself to take advantage of these changes? So whatever your answers to the above questions are, start planning, acting, and responding today. These things take time, and it's a compounding effect day by day, a little by little by little. As I like to say, it was a book written, you'll hear me quote a lot of books in my series because I read very, very frequently. It's a book written by Anne Lamott called Bird by Bird. And it's on writing, how to write effectively. And you take one step at a time, but you got to take the steps. You got to take the steps. You can't just wistfully think about things. You got to start doing actions. Like me, I have to start shooting videos. I have to start loading them up on YouTube, and I have to reflect on them, and I have to look at ways to improve them, and I also have to look at ways to be more efficient at it as well. And I have to think about how that gets marketed and how I get subscribers and that sort of thing. So please, by the way, subscribe to this channel. It helps to build the community that I'm trying to set forth, and you will see new videos as they come up and be part of the community that we're building here. So don't be complacent, as change waits for no one. So I hope you enjoyed this session, and thank you very much. My name is Tom Stephenson, and I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day. Bye for now.